Before the dogs and the golden palaces, before their fleets ruled the Mediterranean and their merchants wove an empire of silk and spices, Venice was nothing more than a fevered dream, an impossible refuge born from chaos. Its history does not begin with a conquest, but with a flight. In the 5th century, as the all-powerful Roman Empire crumbled and hordes of barbarians descended upon Italy sowing terror, a terrified people made a desperate decision to abandon the mainland and seek sanctuary in the most inhospitable and forgotten place of all, a marshy and brackish lagoon at the head of the Adriatic. To understand the feat that is Venice, we must transport ourselves to that decaying world. The Roman order, which had guaranteed peace for centuries, had evaporated. Germanic tribes such as the Goths and the Huns of Attila ravaged the Veneto, a prosperous region in the northeast of Italy. Entire cities were looted, their inhabitants massacred or enslaved. In the midst of this apocalypse, the survivors, coastal people, faced an existential dilemma: to stay and perish or flee to an uncertain fate. The choice they made would define history. Their exodus led them to a labyrinth of more than 100 low islands, marshes and shallow canals, a watery landscape that at first glance seemed uninhabitable. But what was a logistical nightmare for an invading army became a natural fortress for these refugees. The shallow waters prevented the passage of large warships, and the complex network of canals was a deadly maze for anyone unfamiliar with its secrets. The lagoon was not a paradise, but it was safe. The first inhabitants of this new aquatic world were neither nobles nor warriors. They were fishermen, salt workers, and desperate farmers. Their first homes were humble huts built on wooden stilts driven into the mud. A testament to their ingenuity and tenacity, life was precarious, a constant struggle against the tides and scarcity. But in this adversity, they began to forge a new identity, a community united not by blood or land, but by a shared destiny and an absolute dependence on the lagoon. It was these humble origins that sowed the seed of Venetian character, pragmatic, independent, and deeply connected to the sea. They learned to navigate the canals, to harvest salt, which would become their first white gold, and to trade with the coastal peoples. The decisions of their early leaders, figures almost legendary like Paoluccio Anafesto, were not based on grand ideals, but on the immediate need to organize defense, manage resources, and resolve disputes. From these councils of elders and tribunes of the islands would eventually emerge the complex institutions of the Republic. The development of these early settlements was slow and organic. Islands like Torcello and Malamocco became the first centers of power, but as the community grew, so did internal rivalries. The struggle for control of resources and trade routes within the lagoon itself was as real a threat as the invaders from the continent. The question that hung in the brackish air was whether this confederation of refugees could overcome its own divisions to become a true city. The consequences of choosing the lagoon as home were monumental. Isolated from the endless wars that devastated the Italian peninsula, the Venetians were able to develop a unique society oriented towards the sea and trade, while the rest of Europe sank into the fragmentation of the early Middle Ages. In this lagoon, the birth of a commercial power was taking shape. Thus, the history of Venice begins not with glory, but with survival. Its greatness was not inherited, but built literally on water and mud. The fundamental question that this first chapter leaves us with is how a community of refugees in one of the most challenging environments in Europe could not only survive but thrive to become the master of the Mediterranean. Was their isolation a blessing, or was their ingenuity a necessity? As the first stakes are driven into the mud and the first sails are raised in the lagoon, Venice's journey is just beginning. In the next chapter, we will witness how these scattered settlements unite under a single leader, the Duke, and how the city of Venice begins to take the shape we know today, laying the foundations of the longest-lasting and most powerful republic in history, the Most Serene. If you're enjoying the video, give it a like and subscribe to see more content from the channel. The instability on the peninsula gave way to an unexpected development. Thus, in the calm waters of the Venetian Lagoon, a city emerged, a remarkable urban centre that began to forge its identity. In the early Middle Ages, Venice was not merely a collection of islands, it was becoming a refuge for merchants and fishermen who glimpsed in its unique geography an opportunity to escape the constant conflicts that plagued the Italian peninsula. The historical context of this period was marked by political fragmentation. After the fall of the Roman Empire, chaos reigned in the surrounding regions. The Germanic invasions and the instability of power left many communities in uncertainty. However, amidst this disorder, the lagoon stood as a bastion of security. The inhabitants of the islands began to consolidate a network of settlements, seeking not only to protect themselves but also to forge a new destiny. In this landscape, figures such as Paolo Lucio Anafesto, considered the first duke, would play a crucial role. Anafesto, a charismatic leader, understood that the key to survival lay in unity. Under his leadership, a rudimentary system of government was established where the figure of the duke began to take shape, laying the foundations for what would become one of the most unique republics. The development of events during this period was as remarkable as it was transformative. As the islands became populated, the need for a centralized government became evident. In 726, a council of leaders was convened, laying the groundwork for the creation of an administrative body. Over time, this council would evolve into the Great Council, which would become the political heart of Venice. The creation of institutions was a meticulous process, marked by the need to preserve common interests. Thus, in the lagoon, the history of a city aspiring for more began to be written. As the institutions took shape, so did the Venetian identity. The establishment of law and order allowed for a flourishing of trade, which became the engine of the economy. Trade exchanges with the Byzantine Empire and the Arab world began to define not only the character of Venice but also its place in the fabric of Mediterranean commerce. It is pertinent to analyze whether this was a straightforward path to success. The immediate consequences of these changes were profound. The consolidation of Venetian power allowed the city to begin articulating its voice in the world. But it also brought new tensions. The search for resources and markets would lead Venice to position itself at the center of conflicts that, although distant, would resonate in its streets, with each decision made by its leaders. The influence of history began to shape the future of this young city. However, amidst this sea of achievements, a question persisted that would never completely dissipate. Could Venice maintain its independence and prosperity in such a volatile world? The city, still taking its first steps, faced an uncertain destiny, where each wave brought new opportunities but also challenges that would test the strength of its community. As we close this chapter, we find ourselves at a crossroads. Venice, in its quest for identity, was approaching an even greater transformation. As its institutions solidified, the path toward a flourishing republic began to come into view. But Venice's journey would become complicated, and the complexities of politics loomed over its horizon. In the next chapter, we will explore how these institutions gave rise to the creation of a unique government, the Most Serene Republic. The formation of the first institutions gave rise to a new form of governance, a system that would become the heart of the Republic of Venice. In a world of uncertainty, the Most Serene Republic emerged as a particular political model, an example of stability amidst chaos. It is pertinent to analyze what secrets lay behind its facades and its intricate power structures. During the early Middle Ages, Venice found itself at a crossroads. The growth of its population and trade, driven by maritime traffic, made the original political system based on the popular assembly no longer sufficient. Emerging from its history, a new order began to take shape. The figure of the Duke, a leader with considerable power but limited by a system that required consensus, would become the symbol of a new era. In this context, the Great Council was established as the governing body. With a composition that initially included the most influential families, this council became a space for deliberation. But how did the elites ensure that their power was not threatened by the growing influence of the Duke? The answer lies in the strategic decisions of key figures who understood that the balance of power was essential. One of the first dukes to assume a prominent role was Pietro Orseolo, who, in the year 991, began to consolidate the power of the Duke while establishing relations with the Byzantine Empire. His decision to expand trade towards the east, in addition to strengthening Venice's position, was crucial. However, his rise also raised questions about the nature of power. Was the Duke an absolute leader or a first among equals? The ambiguity of his position became a distinctive feature as the political structure consolidated. The Great Council underwent transformations. In the 13th century, its composition expanded to include representatives from various classes, allowing for greater participation. However, this change was not an act of generosity. Rather, it was a calculated maneuver to ensure that the interests of the elites were not threatened. There is debate about whether Venice was building a democratic system or if it was a facade to maintain control. The development of Venetian institutions continued during the 14th century, when the creation of the Council of Ten introduced a new level of secrecy. This council, responsible for security and justice, represented a shift towards centralization. Surveillance loomed over the city, where distrust became a tool of control. The decisions of this council were often made without the consent of the Great Council, blurring the boundaries of power. The consequences of these events were profound. The Most Serene Republic, under the leadership of the Duke and the Great Council, transformed into one of the most influential powers. However, this prosperity did not come without dilemmas. The growing tension between the power of the Duke and the Great Council led to a game of alliances. The question was, who truly governed Venice? As the Republic consolidated, the repercussions of its decisions resonated throughout Europe. The search for a balance between the Duke and the Great Council, between the elite and the people, became a question that persists in the annals of history. There is debate about whether the Venetian elites managed to create a lasting system or if they were destined to be victims of their own ambition. The Most Serene Republic, in its quest for stability, left a legacy that, while admirable, was entangled in the complexity of its contradictions. The history of Venice, with its lights and complexities, becomes a reflection of human character, where the struggle for power is as inevitable as the passage of time. But the analysis of the Republic does not stop here. In the next chapter, we will explore how trade and power intertwined, propelling Venice into an era of splendor. It is pertinent to analyze how the city managed to sustain its position as one of the greatest trading powers. The answer lies in the secrets of its trade routes and in the cunning of its merchants. The political consolidation would soon open the doors to a phenomenon that would transform Venice into a hub of trade and power. In the 11th century, as Europe shook off the High Middle Ages, Venice emerged as a center of prosperity. Its network of canals reflecting a destiny that was about to intertwine with the most important trade routes. The city, with its innovative political structure and strategic location, would become a meeting point between the East and the West. The historical context of this rise was marked by the growing demand for luxury goods and spices from Asia. The importance of trade routes intensified, and while other kingdoms fought for territories, Venice forged strategic alliances with Byzantine and Arab powers, granting it privileged access to exotic goods. The movement of merchant ships filled with silk and spices resonated in the Venetian docks, carrying with it the aroma of an expanding trade. Among the key figures of this era was the Doge Domenico Selvo, who, in the middle of the 11th century, made crucial decisions that cemented Venetian influence. Under his leadership, the fleet was modernized, and the creation of the first maritime law, the Codex Maritimus, established the foundations for the regulation of trade. It is pertinent to analyze what led Selvo to prioritize commercial expansion, whether it was a strategic vision or an urgent necessity. As Venetian ships sailed the Mediterranean, the development of the commenda, one of the earliest forms of commercial partnership, allowed for the consolidation of wealth in the hands of merchant elites. This development was not coincidental. Every decision was imbued with the need to secure a flow of resources. The rivalry with Genoa, for example, intensified due to competition for control of the routes, creating a breeding ground for future confrontations. The arrival of the Crusades further complicated the landscape. Venice, by offering its transportation services, not only strengthened its position but also benefited greatly by obtaining exclusive rights over trade in regions that had previously been foreign to it. This strategy led to the creation of a network of trading colonies in places like Acre and Tyre, where Venetian influence became palpable. However, despite this rise, the question persists about the cost at which this commercial empire was built. The immediate consequences of this expansion were evident. Venice became a center of wealth and culture, attracting merchants and artists. The streets and canals, once silent, filled with life, and institutions flourished, reflecting a power that was felt in every corner. But this unchecked growth also sowed the seeds of rivalry. The dependence on external trade made Venice vulnerable to market fluctuations and geopolitical tensions. Thus, the question of this chapter does not reside solely in the rise of Venice as a commercial power, but also in the complexities that loom over its success. It is debated whether it was truly the strategy of alliances that defined its fate, or whether deeper forces were at play that threatened to destabilize it. As the manifestations of trade resonated in the palaces, a new era of conflicts was approaching. The Crusades, to which Venice had contributed, would soon reveal their dark side, transforming the city into a crucial actor. Thus, we prepare to explore the role of Venice in the Crusades and how this event would mark a turning point, opening doors to complexities yet to be unveiled. The Venetian prosperity, grounded in trade, would soon be challenged by forces that extended beyond mere commercial greed. On the threshold of the 12th century, Europe found itself caught in an unprecedented religious fervor, a manifestation of old that resonated throughout the Christian lands, the Crusades. This movement, driven by devotion and ambition, would not only transform the map of faith, but also forge new alliances and place Venice at the center of a historical storm. In this context of fervor and conflict, Venice emerged as a crucial player. The city, with its canals and unparalleled mercantile capacity, became the gateway to the East. Pope Urban II had launched the call to the Crusade in 1095, urging Christians to reclaim the Holy Land. But who could transport the throngs of crusaders? The Venetian fleets, with their navigational prowess, were the answer to this urgent need. Venice's role in the Fourth Crusade, which would begin in 1002, would be defined by a series of controversial decisions and alliances that would change its history. Under the leadership of Doge Enrico Dandolo, a revered and shrewd leader, the Republic made a bold decision. It would not only transport the Crusaders, but also seek to gain economic and political benefits. It is pertinent to analyze whether this was merely an act of pragmatism, or if there was something more sinister behind their intentions. The Fourth Crusade was originally conceived as a journey to Jerusalem. However, the whims of fate would lead the Crusaders to a detour. Due to financial problems, they were forced to make a stop in Zara, a Croatian port that had been captured by the Hungarians and was a target of Venetian ambition. In an ironic twist, the Christian city was besieged and conquered in 1002, an act that drew the condemnation of the Pope, who excommunicated the Crusaders for attacking a Christian city. Betrayal was present, but Venetian ambition was relentless. Dandolo's focus was not limited to Zara. His gaze was fixed on Constantinople, the emblematic heart of the Byzantine Empire. The city, rich in heritage, had become an obstacle. Through political intrigues, Dandolo convinced the Crusaders that they could overthrow the Byzantine emperor and secure a bounty of treasures. The decision proved to be a turning point, as the siege of Constantinople in 1004 would not only mark the end of the Byzantine Empire, but also transform Venice into one of the most influential maritime powers. The events of 1004 would unleash a torrent of consequences. The city, looted and devastated, would become a new hunting ground for the Venetians, who seized countless relics. The famous quadriga of St. Mark, which still adorns the Basilica of St. Mark today, is a testament to the spoils brought back. It is pertinent to analyze the cost of this action. The fall of Constantinople not only signified the rise of Venice, but also the creation of a legacy stained by violence. Loyalty to a religious cause had faded, replaced by unbridled ambition. This dark chapter in Venetian history raises a lingering question. Was the Fourth Crusade a step toward glory, or a turn that sealed the city's fate on a path of loss? Venice's ambition, while acclaimed by many, was also a reminder of how power can corrupt the purest intentions. As the influence of the Fourth Crusade dissipated, the repercussions of its decisions resonated in Venetian power. That conflict had not only transformed the political structure, but also sowed the seeds of future rivalries. As Venice rose as a power, other players such as Genoa waited, ready to challenge its supremacy. This historical crossroads leads us to reflect on the future of Venice. With each victory, new threats arise. And time will tell if the ambition of Dandolo and his successors was a legacy worth remembering. The Republic's gaze will focus on its golden age, a period that looms ahead and will be marked by the decisions made in this era. Thus, as the waters of the Lagoon continue to flow, the echoes of those times still resonate in the Venetian atmosphere, waiting to be deciphered. The next stage will take us to its splendor and a cultural legacy that would mark it forever. It is pertinent to analyze what new wonders and challenges awaited and how the decisions of its leaders would shape the future. If you're enjoying the video, give it a like and subscribe to see more content from the channel. The end of the Crusades would soon transform into the foundation of what would be known as the Golden Age of Venice, a period of splendor that would extend throughout the 14th and 15th centuries. In this context, the city not only overcame its adversities, but emerged as a center of culture and wealth, consolidating itself as a hub of art and knowledge in Europe. During this era, Venice, with its innovative political structure and vast trade networks, became an enclave where ideas and commerce flowed with the same intensity as the waters of its lagoon. The influence of the Most Serene Republic was felt not only in the Mediterranean but also in the courts of Europe, where its cultural legacy began to leave a mark. The Doge in command of the city became a symbol of stability, while the Great Council was responsible for the decisions that would define the course of the Republic. The 14th and 15th centuries witnessed an unprecedented cultural flourishing. Artists such as Giovanni Bellini and Tintoretto, whose works would adorn Venetian churches and palaces, began to forge their personal style, influenced by the Renaissance that was emerging in other parts of Italy. It is pertinent to analyze what motivated this artistic explosion in a city that had been marked by struggle. The strategic decisions of the Great Council and the wealth accumulated through trade not only allowed for the patronage of artists, but also fostered an environment in which education and culture could thrive. The creation of educational institutions and the arrival of scholars transformed Venice into a center of knowledge. The University of Padua, under Venetian influence, became a symbol of this advancement, attracting students and thinkers. In this context of cultural effervescence, art not only flourished, it became a vehicle for the expression of identity. The architecture of the city, with its intricate facades and majestic palaces, reflected a dialogue between the ancient and the new. St. Mark's Square, with its imposing basilica and the Doge's palace, stood as a testament to Venetian power, while the canals, traversed by gondolas, became the stage for daily life. One of the most notable aspects of this era was the role of women in society. Despite the limitations of a patriarchal society, some women managed to stand out. The poet Veronica Franco, for example, not only challenged conventions but also became a key figure in intellectual life. It is pertinent to analyze what secrets these women hid in a world dominated by men. Trade, however, remained the heart of the Republic. Venice established routes that extended from North Africa to Northern Europe, becoming the crucial intermediary between East and West. Goods arrived at its ports, spices and silk that enriched the elite. The decisions of the Doge and the Great Council were always aimed at consolidating this position. It is pertinent to analyze the cost of this control. The rivalry with other maritime powers such as Genoa intensified. As the Golden Age progressed, art and culture intertwined with the economy. Fairs and markets filled with works of art, while banquets in the courts were accompanied by music. Social life was characterized by a mix of opulence and sophistication. However, amid this splendor, war and rivalry were always present. Tensions with Genoa would culminate in a series of conflicts that would mark the end of the Golden Age. The decisions made by Venetian leaders in the subsequent years would have a lasting impact. There is debate over whether the cultural and economic legacy of Venice could survive these trials. The immediate consequences of this period were profound. Venice not only established itself as a maritime power, but also laid the groundwork for a cultural exchange that would influence future generations. The Renaissance art born in this time would resonate through the centuries. The question of the Golden Age, however, looms over the future of Venice. There is debate over whether it was truly a period of stability or if hidden tensions were sowing the seeds of its decline. The brilliance of the Golden Age, filled with achievements and complexities, invites us to reflect on the fragility of greatness. As we delve into the next chapter, we will confront the maritime rivalries that threaten to destabilize the Most Serene Republic. It is pertinent to analyze what challenges lie on the horizon of this city that, despite its splendor, never ceased to be a historical question. The Golden Age of the Most Serene Republic flourished. However, behind its splendor, tensions were brewing that threatened its stability. Venice, a labyrinth of canals, was not only a center of trade and art. It was also a covert battlefield where maritime rivalries intertwined with the fate of nations. In this context, the influence of Genoa loomed over the Venetian horizon. At the beginning of the 13th century, the Mediterranean was at a crossroads. The trade routes carrying spices and silks were a coveted treasure. Venice, in its rise, had established a trade network that rivaled that of its ancient adversary, Genoa. The latter, with its own powerful fleet, was not willing to yield its influence without a fight. Thus, the waters of the sea became a stage for rivalry and conflict, where each victory and defeat resonated in the palaces of both cities. The leaders of Venice, such as the Doge Enrico Dandolo, began to outline a bold foreign policy aimed at consolidating Venetian power. Dandolo, a man of vision, understood that the prosperity of the Republic depended not only on its trade but also on its ability to defend it. Maritime rivalries demanded strategic alliances, and so Venice began to weave a network of pacts, seeking allies in its struggle against Genoa. However, the decisions they made were not without risks. It is pertinent to analyze how much they were willing to sacrifice to maintain their influence. The clash between these two powers would soon manifest. In the year 1256, tensions erupted in the Battle of Acre, a decisive confrontation that would mark the course of the rivalry. The Venetian fleet faced the Genoese armada in a battle that would echo throughout history. The waves were stained red, and the sound of cannons mingled with the cries of sailors. The victory, though costly, granted Venice a strategic advantage. However, the war was far from over. As the 13th century progressed, conflicts followed one after another, and each victory or defeat at sea had repercussions on domestic politics. Citizens, caught between pride and fear, questioned the decisions of their leaders. It was debated whether Venetian pride was a drive that would lead them to glory or to ruin. The answer to this question seemed to blur in the mists of the Lagoon. Over time, the conflict with Genoa became more complex, involving other powers such as the Kingdom of France and the Byzantine Empire. allies and enemies intertwined in a strategic dance where the decisions of a leader could change the course. The rivalry not only affected the economy, it was about Venetian identity itself, about the struggle for survival in a world where betrayal and loyalty intertwined. The consequences of these rivalries were profound. The Venetian economy, although robust, was affected by the costs of war. Trade routes were threatened, and merchants who once sailed with confidence began to feel the weight of fear. The influence of Genoa stretched, and the question that lingered was whether Venice could maintain its independence in the face of such a formidable adversary. The issue surrounding these maritime rivalries is noteworthy. Despite the victories and defeats, it is debated whether the hostility between Venice and Genoa was a struggle for power, or if there were deeper motivations at play. It is pertinent to analyze what secrets and hidden alliances shaped the fate of these two powers. As the repercussions of history continue to resonate, it is clear that maritime rivalry not only defined the foreign policy of Venice, but also left a mark on its legacy. As we delve into the next stage, we encounter the territorial expansion of Venice, an effort to consolidate its power on the continent. In a world where war and diplomacy intertwine, it is pertinent to analyze what challenges the Republic would face in trying to maintain its influence. The story of Venetian expansion is about to unfold, revealing more complexities. Maritime rivalries revealed the true face of Venice. The Most Serene Republic, a city built on ambition, now faced the necessity of expanding its influence beyond the Lagoon. As the 15th century approached, the pressure to consolidate its territorial power on the continent became unavoidable. Venetian expansion was not only a reflection of its prosperity, but also a strategic bulwark against the looming threats. In the context of a fragmented Italy where city-states competed for control, Venice stood tall as a giant. The rivalry with powers such as Milan and Florence compelled the Republic to seek new lands that would secure its supremacy. Venetian ambition was not limited to its coasts. Its gaze ventured inland, attempting to weave a network of alliances and conquests that would affirm it as a leader. Doge Francesco Foscari, a central figure of this era, became the architect of this expansion. His government, marked by a fervor for greatness, led him to make bold decisions. Foscari, in his quest to increase territory, propelled military campaigns northward, capturing strategic areas such as Padua and Vicenza. It is pertinent to analyze what motivated Foscari to risk so much, whether it was the desire for personal glory or a broader vision of security. Challenges were unavoidable. The expansion of Venice involved not only conquest but also the incorporation of diverse populations. Tensions with local elites were palpable. Many viewed the Venetians as oppressors. In this environment, diplomatic skill became an essential tool. Venetians learned that conquest had to be accompanied by promises of autonomy and economic benefits. Throughout these campaigns, the figure of Bartolomeo Colleoni emerged as a key military leader. His prowess on the battlefield, combined with a shrewd ability to negotiate, earned him respect. However, his ambition also led him to make risky decisions, such as the Battle of Lepanto, where his innovative tactics resulted in a decisive victory. It is debated whether this victory was a milestone or a mirage that concealed internal fractures. The consequences of Venetian expansion were felt quickly. The incorporation of new territories brought unprecedented wealth but also intensified rivalries. Milan, under the rule of Francesco Sforza, soon recognized the threat. Alliances formed and dissolved, while war seemed to be a constant. The streets of Venice, once resonating with the bustle of merchants, began to fill with the influence of military strategies. As war loomed over Venice, the population wondered whether this expansion would be salvation or condemnation. Old myths began to fade, leaving a legacy of ambition and conflict. At its core, the question that lingered was whether it was possible to maintain a balance between expansion and internal stability. The complex nature of this expansion left deep marks on the social fabric. The Republic, which had flourished thanks to harmony, found itself at a crossroads. Promises of greatness faced the harsh reality of resistance. It is debated whether Venice could find a way to integrate these new territories without losing its essence. The answer would lie in the events to come. Thus, the expansion of Venice became a chapter filled with complexities and contradictions, a decisive moment. The struggle for territorial supremacy not only defined its present but also planted the seeds of its future. As the Republic faced the challenge of maintaining its power, the repercussions of its decisions would resonate through time, leaving unanswered questions. The transition to the Renaissance was on the horizon, and with it, the promise of an era in which art and science would flourish, a change that would transform Venetian identity. The question now was how this new era would influence the development of a Venice that had already proven to be both a bastion of power and a historical question. The territorial expansion of Venice began to feel the influence of a profound change, a whisper that slid through its canals. The Renaissance, a cultural movement that spread across Europe, arrived in these lands like a glow that illuminated the complexities of the past. This era of artistic splendor would not only transform the city's appearance but also cement its legacy as one of the great cultural centers of the world. It is pertinent to analyze what forces were at play in this rebirth. By the end of the 15th century, Venice was a web of powerful guilds and wealthy merchants who had forged a maritime empire. However, material prosperity was not enough to quench the thirst for knowledge that was beginning to awaken in the elite. The influences of great Italian masters such as Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo began to resonate, and with them the idea that art could be more than a reflection of devotion, it could be a celebration of life. In this context, key figures such as the patrician and patron Andrea Gritti and the painter Giorgione emerged as protagonists. Gritti, a champion of the arts, used his influence and wealth to sponsor artists, promoting the creation of works that captured not only the essence of the divine, but also the beauty of the human being. Giorgione, for his part, became a pioneer by integrating light and color in such an innovative way that his works seemed to vibrate, challenging conventions. The development of architecture also found a new breath. St. Mark's Square, the heart of the city, began to transform. St. Mark's Basilica, with its blend of Byzantine, Gothic, and Renaissance styles, became a symbol of Venetian power. The architect Jacopo Sansovino was a key player, erecting the Marciana Library and the Zecca, which not only beautified the square but also established a new architectural standard. In the musical realm, the Renaissance brought a revolution. Composers such as Giovanni Gabrieli and Claudio Monteverdi began to experiment with new forms, using polyphony to create masterpieces that resonated in churches. These innovations not only enriched cultural life, but also established Venice as a renowned musical center, where music became a universal language. However, this flourishing was not without challenges. The political and economic tensions brewing at the edges of the Republic began to threaten stability. Venice's ambition to expand its influence, often in conflict with other powers such as the Ottoman Empire, generated an atmosphere of uncertainty. It is debated whether the splendor of the Renaissance could survive the storms that were approaching. The repercussions of these questions would resonate, leaving a question in Venetian history. How could a city built on water with such a vibrant legacy face the winds of change? As artists and thinkers sought new forms of expression, the future of Venice hung by a thread in a delicate balance between glory and decline. The events that mark this era of splendor left indelible marks. The decisions of its leaders and the passion of its artists created a complex tapestry that, although brilliant, also hid deep complexities. The pursuit of beauty not only defined a generation but also set the stage for the tumultuous events to come. As the Republic struggled to maintain its autonomy in a changing world, the legacy of the Renaissance would become a guide, a hope in a sea of uncertainty. It is pertinent to analyze how this quest for continuity would translate in a moment of imminent crisis. The history of Venice does not stop. As the city shone with the brilliance of the Renaissance, a new threat loomed over it. the League of Cambrai began to take shape, and with it, the repercussions of a war that would threaten to erase the splendor achieved. The struggle for the survival of the Republic was approaching, and with each brushstroke and each note, a narrative of resistance was woven. The Renaissance was a time of increasing tensions and fragile alliances. As Venice asserted itself as a commercial power, its rivals began to devise a plan that threatened to dismantle the Most Serene Republic. This chapter delves into the issue of the League of Cambrai, a coalition of forces that united with the purpose of ending Venetian supremacy and reclaiming control over trade routes. In the context of the 16th century, Europe was in a state of instability where rivalries between nations intertwined in a delicate balance. In this environment, Venetian power was perceived both as a center of prosperity and as an influence looming over the ambitions of its neighbors. The Republic, strong in its trade, had accumulated a series of enemies. France, Spain, the Pope, and the Duchy of Milan saw in Venice not only a competitor, but a threat that they needed to neutralize. In this context of conspiracy, Pope Julius II emerged as a key figure. Known for his ambition and desire to restore the temporal power of the Church, he joined forces with European powers in an alliance known as the League of Cambrai. His objective was clear: to annihilate Venetian power whose influences extended across the Adriatic. However, his decision was not without controversy. It is debated whether the union of these nations was an act of justice or an attempt to unify the elites against a common enemy. The leaders of this confederation gathered and began to devise strategies. King Louis XII of France, a shrewd player, saw in the League an opportunity to consolidate his own influence in Italy. The ambition of the Venetian Doge, Leonardo Loredan, was challenged by this new front. The history of the League of Cambrai would not only be defined by its military capacity, but also by the strategic decisions of its actors. The first act of this tragedy unfolded in 1508, when the forces of the League launched an offensive against Venice. In a series of confrontations, the city found itself overwhelmed, facing a war that threatened its existence. The Battle of Agnadello, a manifestation of tragedy, became a symbol of the Republic's vulnerability. In a dramatic turn, the Venetian troops, confident in their naval cunning, were outmatched on the battlefield, suffering devastating losses. However, not all was lost. As the war progressed, alliances began to fracture. The ambition of each state generated distrust. The promise of victory that had united the League crumbled in the face of individual interests. Thus, the decisions made reflected the fragility of alliances. It is pertinent to analyze whether war was a viable solution or a path toward mutual destruction. The immediate consequences of this series of confrontations were profound. Venice lost territories, but at the same time, a resistance emerged that had not been anticipated. The Republic's ability to adapt and its robust economy allowed it to withstand the onslaught. The war, in its essence, had not only been a military challenge, but a testament to Venetian resilience. The question of the League of Cambrai lies in its ability to unite such diverse powers, only to be torn apart by individual ambition. It is debated how it is possible for such a powerful union to collapse so quickly. The answers to these questions remain in the history of Europe, where power and betrayal often walk hand in hand. As the conflict prolonged, Venice was not only fighting for its survival, but also beginning to forge new strategies that would lead it to a more robust defense. The next chapter will take us to explore how the Most Serene Republic, through its ingenuity, managed not only to survive, but also to maintain its independence in an increasingly hostile world. It is pertinent to analyze whether Venice could find a way to navigate the difficulties that threatened to consume its legacy. The formation of the League of Cambrai became a life-or-death struggle for the independence of the Republic. On the threshold of the 16th century, the waters of the Venetian Lagoon were tinged with uncertainty. The coalition of European powers that united to dismantle the power of Venice jeopardized the very existence of the Most Serene Republic. In this context, the strategies and alliances that Venice would forge would become its most valuable bulwark. The political atmosphere preceding these events was marked by the rivalry among the Italian city-states and the resurgence of great monarchies. France, the Holy Roman Empire, and Spain were the main actors, each with their own ambitions. Venice, with its wealth and commercial influence, found itself at the center of a whirlwind of intrigues. The city, revered for its splendor, was also seen as an obstacle. Thus, the Venetian strategy would be forced to adapt and find allies in a world where loyalty was ephemeral. In this web of alliances and betrayals, one figure would rise as the architect of Venetian defense: the Doge Leonardo Loredan. His leadership during these critical years would be fundamental. Upon receiving news of the formation of the League, Loredan, a man of cunning and determination, was compelled to act swiftly. Aware that war was imminent, he proposed a series of strategic alliances to destabilize the enemy coalition. Through negotiations, Venice secured the support of the Ottomans, who viewed the fall of the Republic as a threat to their borders. The union with a powerful empire, although risky, offered crucial protection. The defense of the Most Serene Republic was also configured in the military realm. The Venetian fleet, one of the most feared, was restructured. New naval tactics were introduced, highlighting the use of lighter galleys. Under the command of admirals such as Francesco Duodo, the navy not only prepared for defense but also launched offensives, seeking to weaken the League. This tactical cunning was not without risks. It is debated whether the Venetian fleet could withstand the onslaught of a united front. Events unfolded with notable intensity. The first major confrontation occurred in 1509 at the Battle of Agnadello. The Republic, confident in its strategy, was caught off guard by the coordination of enemy forces. The defeat was crushing, leaving the city in a state of vulnerability. But the Most Serene Republic was not willing to surrender. Loredan's response was swift. An emergency meeting of the Great Council was convened where new alliances were discussed. Through diplomacy and war, Venice began to regain ground. The arrival of Ottoman reinforcements and support from other city-states were vital. At this stage, Loredan's ability to maintain a delicate balance became evident. The decisions made in those moments reveal a persistent question: to what extent can political cunning prevail over brute force? As the years passed, the war became a war of attrition. The League, although united at first, began to show cracks. Internal tensions led some allies to reconsider their positions. Venice, by exploiting these disagreements, implemented propaganda strategies, fueling rumors and distrust, which allowed it to regain some of its prestige. It is pertinent to analyze whether this was sufficient to guarantee independence. Finally, after years of confrontations, a turning point was reached. In 1516, the signing of the Peace of Noyon marked a milestone. The League of Cambrai dissolved, and Venice managed to maintain its independence. However, this triumph did not come without a cost. The war had left deep scars, and its economy, although recovered, would never be the same. Loredan's decisions, while effective, generated a legacy of distrust. The question that remains after these events is profound. How did a city seemingly surrounded by enemies manage not only to survive but also to adapt? The strategies of Venice invite us to reflect on the nature of power. In this context of complexities, the history of the Most Serene Republic unfolds like a tapestry of decisions, alliances, and betrayals. As we look ahead, the repercussions of Loredan's decisions and his council resonate. The next stage in the life of Venice intertwines with innovation, where new trade routes and technological advances will shape its next chapter. Thus, history continues, and the complexities of the Most Serene Republic still await to be unveiled. The defense of the Republic was followed by an unexpected renaissance. In the heart of the Lagoon, Venice not only survived the ravages of time but found itself at the pinnacle of a technological revolution that would solidify its status as a titan of commerce. As waves of exploration expanded, the Most Serene Republic transformed into a center of innovation, a place where curiosity and ambition intertwined with the necessity of survival. By the end of the 15th century, Europe stood at a crossroads. The quest for new trade routes intensified, driven by the growing demand for spices and gold. In this context, Venice, with its privileged geographical position and its control over the Mediterranean routes, prepared to seize the era of exploration. The political atmosphere was marked by fierce competition, and the Republic could not afford to be a mere spectator. Among the key figures of this period was the Doge Francesco Foscari, who understood that the key to maintaining Venetian supremacy lay in the adoption of new technologies. Foscari, a visionary leader, supported the creation of innovative shipyards and the construction of more efficient vessels, such as galleys, which allowed Venice to dominate the waters. These ships, with their aerodynamic design and cargo capacity, were essential for sustaining trade. However, innovation was not limited to shipbuilding. The Venetians also ventured into cartography, developing more accurate maps that provided them with a significant advantage. The figure of Fra Mauro, a cartographer of the 15th century, resonates in this narrative. His works, which combined practical observations and theories, laid the groundwork for a new era in exploration. It is pertinent to analyze how many secrets awaited in those maps and what mysteries of the ocean could be unraveled. With the advent of the printing press, knowledge began to circulate more rapidly. Innovations in ship construction spread, but Venice remained at the forefront, establishing nautical schools. The demand for Eastern products, especially spices, continued to rise, and Venice, being the main gateway, flourished in an environment of wealth. During this time, explorers such as Marco Polo had sown the seed of curiosity. Although his famous journey to Asia had taken place a century earlier, his legacy continued to influence. Stories about the wonders of the East fueled the desire for adventure. Thus, with the support of the government, figures like Alvise Cadamosto embarked on the exploration of the African coast, opening new routes that would change the course of trade history. As these explorations progressed, the immediate consequences began to become evident. The arrival of products from distant lands brought not only an increase in prosperity, but also a change in the social landscape. Venice became a melting pot of cultures where merchants of various nationalities mingled, creating a vibrant atmosphere. The influence of these interactions was reflected in art, gastronomy, and architecture. Nevertheless, this period of splendor was not without complexities. As wealth flowed, so did tensions. The rivalry with other powers, especially with the Ottomans and cities like Genoa, was palpable. There is debate over whether Venice's unchecked growth would awaken envy. History, with its cycle of rise and fall, seemed to foreshadow that the serenity of the Republic could be in jeopardy. The question of this chapter looms over the figure of Venice as a pioneer in innovation. As the city navigated toward new frontiers, it also pondered what cost its ambition would entail. There is debate over whether the decisions of its leaders and the pursuit of power would be sufficient to secure its legacy, or if they would sow the seeds of its own destruction. As the history of Venice intertwined with the fates of bold explorers, the city found itself on the brink of tragedy. The discovery of new routes that challenged its monopoly was just around the corner, and the future of the Republic hung by a thread. Thus, the tides of time prepared to sweep Venice into a new chapter, where decline loomed on the commercial horizon. The era of innovation in Venice was a time when its ships sailed the Mediterranean, carrying spices and tales from distant lands. However, amidst this splendor, an imminent change began to take shape. The arrival of new trade routes driven by European explorers threatened to strip the Most Serene Republic of its ancestral monopoly. Thus, the Venetian economy, which had flourished for centuries, faced a decline that would resonate through its streets. The historical context of this period is characterized by the constant search for new routes to the east. By the end of the 15th century, navigation became an art that challenged the limits of knowledge. Explorers such as Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama, in their quest to find new pathways to the Indies, would open routes that not only changed the map but also undermined the foundations of the Venetian economy. Until then, Venetian trade had been the bridge between Europe and Asia, a monopoly that enriched the elite. But competition began to cast a shadow over Venetian splendor. In this scenario, key figures emerged. The Doge Agostino Barbarigo, who assumed power in 1486, became a symbol of resistance to these changes. Under his leadership, the Republic attempted to consolidate its influence, but the decisions he made, though brave, were insufficient in the face of global transformation. Barbarigo faced a dilemma: to continue fighting to maintain the monopoly or to adapt to a changing world. Meanwhile, events unfolded at a dizzying pace. In 1492, Columbus arrived in America, opening a new continent full of riches. This feat, although celebrated in other parts of Europe, marked a turning point for Venice. As the Spanish and Portuguese ventured forth, the products that once traversed the Venetian canals began to be redirected towards new routes, leaving the city behind. The Venetian economy, dependent on its monopoly over spices, began to wobble. The immediate consequences of these decisions were devastating. The prices of Venetian products began to fall, and the merchants who once boasted of their fortunes found themselves struggling to survive. Trade became less profitable, and consequently government revenues decreased. The infrastructure that had been built with hard work began to deteriorate, reflecting a declining economy. Families that had prospered started to see their wealth fade away, leaving an atmosphere of uncertainty. It is debated whether the arrival of new trade routes was the sole cause of the Venetian decline. In a world where trade and power are intertwined, a question arises. How could a city that had been a center of commerce and culture fall into such a deep abyss? Was it the inability to adapt to changes, or were there other hidden factors? Thus, the analysis of the decline of trade in Venice looms over the city, raising questions that resonate in its canals. The history of the Republic is not only a chronicle of splendor, but also of vulnerability. Competition, poor decisions, and a lack of adaptation have left a legacy that continues to be a subject of study. Against the backdrop of this question, the history of Venice delves into an even darker period. The Black Death, a calamity that would ravage the city, looms on the horizon, bringing a new set of challenges that will threaten the very existence of the Republic. It is pertinent to analyze how Venice will confront this new crisis and what secrets await in the depths of its history. If you're enjoying the video, give it a like and subscribe to see more content from the channel. The commercial decline unveiled a new horror that would loom over the Most Serene Republic. In the year 1347, a shadowy traveller brought with him to Venice an invisible enemy, the Black Death. This devastating phenomenon, which had begun to ravage Europe, would soon become a force that would stalk its citizens, transforming daily life into a scene of fear and despair. The historical context of this period was marked by a prosperous Venice, a center of trade and culture amidst uncertainty. However, despite its wealth, the city faced tensions. Trade disputes with other powers such as Genoa and the pressure of wars kept the elite on alert. This environment, where commerce was the soul of the city, was preparing to be shaken by a situation that could not be negotiated: the arrival of the plague. The key figures in this story include the Venetian nobles, who, in the face of the imminent arrival of the plague, were forced to make decisions that would change the course of the Republic. The Doge, Andrea Dandolo, became the face of the fight against the disease, and his leadership during the crisis would be put to the test. Dandolo, along with his council, found himself faced with a dilemma: how to protect the city without provoking the panic that could dismantle the social structure. The plague arrived in Venice through trade routes, a reminder that the very commerce that had brought wealth could also be devastating. Merchant ships, with their holds filled with goods, brought a deadly cargo. infected rats and fleas carrying the Yersinia pestis bacteria. Within weeks, records would indicate an alarming rise in deaths, and the once bustling city would transform into a manifestation of lamentation. The measures taken by the Venetian authorities were both innovative and drastic. In an attempt to contain the outbreak, the famous quarantine was implemented. Arriving ships were required to remain on the island of Lazaretto Nuovo for 40 days, a period that gave rise to the term. This decision, although necessary, revealed uncertainty and fear. The streets, once filled with life, were stripped of their joy. Festivities were extinguished and masks, symbols of Venetian art, became an emblem of collective mourning. As the plague advanced, families crumbled and deaths piled up. The response of the church, which had been a pillar, was compromised. Funerals became quick ceremonies, and the ability of the religious community to offer comfort was limited. Death loomed over every corner, leaving the population in a state of fear. The immediate consequences of the Black Death were devastating. It is estimated that between 1/3 and half of the population of Venice perished. The economy, which had been flourishing, suffered a collapse. The markets, once bustling, became empty spaces. The social structure wavered, and distrust grew among citizens who sought scapegoats. There is debate as to whether the Black Death was solely responsible for the suffering. This question persists, a reminder of how crises can expose the weaknesses of a society. It is pertinent to analyze what secrets awaited in the city, hidden behind the tragedy. The Black Death not only laid bare the fragility of life, but also revealed the resilience of its people. The history of that time has left deep scars. The Black Death was not merely a calamity, but a catalyst for changes that transformed social structures. The decisions made, although motivated by urgency, gave rise to a new way of thinking about public health, a legacy that endures. As the plague finally subsided, the history of Venice did not stop. The aftermath would mark the path toward the next stage. On the horizon loomed a battle that would change the fate of the Republic. In the following chapters, we will explore how Venice's participation in the Battle of Lepanto would not only challenge its resilience but also define its place in the Mediterranean. It is pertinent to analyze how the city would prepare to face the next threat. The Black Plague transformed into a crucial struggle for control of the Mediterranean. In 1571, the signs of the impending battle resonated in the waters that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. The Ottoman expansion had become a matter feared by many nations, and Venice, with its rich maritime heritage, found itself at the epicenter of this conflict. The Battle of Lepanto would not only be a military confrontation, but also a decisive test of Venetian resilience. The historical context surrounding Venice was complex. The Most Serene Republic had been a key player in trade, maintaining relations not only with Christian powers but also with the Ottomans. However, as the Ottoman Empire expanded, its influence became increasingly threatening, challenging Venetian supremacy. The balance of power was teetering, and alliances were formed and dissolved. The leaders of the time would play a crucial role. On the Christian side, Don Juan of Austria, half-brother of King Philip II of Spain, would become the commander of the fleet of the Holy League, a coalition that included Venice, Spain, and the papacy. His arrival brought not only military leadership, but also the hope of a renaissance. On the Venetian side, the Doge Alvise, the first Mocenigo, found himself in a delicate position. He was aware that the survival of the Republic depended on the ability to confront the Ottomans. In the months leading up to the battle, the Venetian fleet prepared meticulously, constructing galleys and training sailors. The decision to join the Holy League marked a milestone in Venetian politics, as it meant setting aside old trade relations. The unfolding of events culminated on the 7th of October in 1571, when the fleets of the Holy League and the Ottoman Empire met in the Gulf of Lepanto. The battle was fought on a calm sea, a contrast to the fury that would be unleashed. The Venetian galleys lined up alongside those of their allies, uniting their fates. The roar of cannons and the clash of swords echoed a manifestation of an anticipated confrontation. As the battle progressed, Don Juan's leadership became evident. The tactic of coordinating attacks on the Ottoman ships began to bear fruit. The Venetian galleys, with their expert crew, proved to be a formidable force. However, the confrontation was not without losses. The men of Venice fought bravely, but the cost was high. It is debated whether it was an undisputed victory or a deceptive triumph. As the day drew to a close, the victory of the Holy League was solidified. The Ottoman ships retreated, marking a turning point. Venice, having played a fundamental role, saw its reputation revitalized. However, the immediate consequences of the Battle of Lepanto were both celebrations and laments. The victory temporarily united the Christian forces, but it also left a legacy of tensions. The question that arises from this confrontation is profound and persistent. It is pertinent to analyze how such a decisive event could not radically change the fate of the Ottoman Empire. Despite the victory, the Ottoman threat would continue, and Venice, although reinforced, would face new challenges. The battle was not only a conflict of ships, but also a symbol of the endless struggle between civilizations. The story of the Battle of Lepanto reflects the complex web of alliances and decisions that would define the future of Venice. As the Republic emerged from this conflict, it began to glimpse a new horizon, but not without the influence of past events. And so, while the Republic rejoiced, its own decline began to take shape. The struggle for survival was not over, and the challenges to come threatened to erode the legacy of one of the most emblematic cities. The transition toward decline would be a journey as remarkable as the confrontation that had just taken place. The victory at Lepanto would soon blur the outlines of the glorious Republic of Venice, whose complexities stretched over time. As the 17th century progressed, the Most Serene Republic began to experience a decline that seemed inconceivable. The notable decay of the Republic was fueled by a mix of internal and external factors, a labyrinth of decisions and events that, as repercussions of the past, would resonate in its streets. In the historical context of this era, Venice found itself at a crossroads. Over the centuries, the city had managed to consolidate a unique political system where the Doge, elected by the elites, wielded considerable power, yet constrained by the need for balance. However, by the arrival of the 17th century, internal tensions began to surface. Corruption infiltrated, while the power of the nobility became more oligarchic, weakening the democratic foundations. It is pertinent to analyze how this point was reached, where personal ambition began to eclipse the common good. Among the key figures of this turbulent time were individuals like Francesco Molin, who held the position of Doge from 1650 to 1655. His administration was marked by decisions that proved ineffective. Molin attempted to strengthen alliances and maintain peace in an unstable Mediterranean, but his efforts were thwarted by the growing rivalry with the Ottoman Empire and the pressure from emerging powers. It is debated whether a single man could have saved a republic clinging to its past glory. Meanwhile, the decline of Venetian trade became undeniable. The maritime routes that had brought wealth began to be invaded by new powers. The arrival of the Portuguese and Spanish, who dominated the oceans, and the expansion of the Netherlands altered the economic balance. The Venetian monopoly, a bastion of its wealth, was in jeopardy. As the Venetian fleets withdrew, the city plunged into uncertainty. It is debated whether this marked the end of a commercial empire. The unfolding of events became even more complicated with the War of Spanish Succession, a conflict that dragged Venice into a sea of intrigues. The Republic found itself trapped in a conflict that was not its own, struggling to maintain its territories. The decisions of leaders, such as the alliance with the Austrian Empire, reflected a desperation to cling to a legacy that was crumbling. However, the Republic's ability to manage the war was limited by corruption. The manifestations of a glorious Venice began to fade. The immediate consequences were devastating. The lack of a cohesive response to external threats and the growing dissatisfaction with the oligarchic government led to an increase in tensions. Revolts began to brew while discontent was fueled by frustration over the ineffectiveness of its leaders. The streets of Venice, once full of life, began to resonate with the murmur of disillusionment. It is debated whether the Most Serene Republic could succumb to internal decay. The question surrounding the decline of the Republic lies at the intersection of these forces. As the city entered the 18th century, questions multiplied. What had failed in its political structure? How could such a powerful commercial empire fall into irrelevance? The history of Venice was becoming increasingly complex. A series of decisions and events intertwined in a web of causes and effects. As the chapter of decline closed, the Republic prepared to face new currents. The arrival of the Enlightenment would bring a new breath of ideas and changes that would challenge the status quo. In this context, the narrative of Venice intertwined with the quest for a new order, a search that perhaps could redeem the Most Serene Republic from the complexities that threatened to devour its legacy. The decline of the Republic gave way to a new paradigm. As the 18th century progressed, the complexities of the decline began to clear, revealing a glimmer of ideas that promised to transform the structure of Venetian society. The Enlightenment, that intellectual movement advocating for reason and freedom, resonated in the corners of the city, challenging old traditions and provoking a ripple of change in every canal. In this context, Enlightenment Venice found itself caught between the splendor of its past and the uncertainty of its future. The city, emblematic for its art, was also a hotbed of critical thought. As Enlightenment ideas crossed the Alps, Venice could not remain indifferent. The quest for truth and the questioning of authority became the daily bread, transforming ancient hierarchies into a mosaic of new possibilities. Among the protagonists of this era, a group of Venetian intellectuals began to take the lead. Figures such as Carlo Goldoni and Giacomo Casanova not only stood out for their literary contributions but also for their role as spokespersons of a cultural change. Goldoni, with his innovative approach to comedy, broke with the conventions of traditional theatre, while Casanova, famous for his adventurous life, embodied the spirit of freedom and curiosity that characterized the Enlightenment. These men would challenge norms and push Venetian society toward an uncertain yet promising future. The impact of Enlightenment ideas was not limited to the cultural sphere. It also had profound consequences in the political realm. The Republic, which had maintained an oligarchic system for centuries, was increasingly questioned by new currents advocating for citizen participation. The writings of thinkers such as Rousseau and Voltaire circulated clandestinely, sowing the seeds of doubt. It was debated whether the Most Serene Republic could withstand the onslaught of rationality. As Enlightenment ideas took hold, social movements began to emerge demanding reforms. Education, which had been a privilege, started to be seen as a universal right. New educational institutions were founded to promote knowledge. Culture was becoming democratized, and Venice, once a bastion of the elite, began to open its doors to a new type of citizen, one who sought not only pleasure but also an understanding of the world. However, the path to progress was not linear. The Venetian nobility, fearful of losing their influence, reacted with frenzy. Philosophers and reformers faced the resistance of a regime that had thrived on tradition. Censorship became a mechanism of control to silence dissenting voices. It was debated whether repression could halt the momentum of a movement that had found its manifestation in so many minds. In this whirlwind of transformation, events unfolded rapidly and often chaotically. Uprisings and protests began to sprout, fueled by the frustration of those who felt marginalized. The aristocracy, caught between fear and the need to adapt, was forced to consider reforms. This dilemma led to an intense debate about the nature of power. The question that lingered was whether the Republic of Venice could embrace Enlightenment ideas without losing its essence. The immediate consequences of this period of upheaval were profound. The elite, driven by the fear of losing control, began to implement reforms that, although superficial, marked a change. Spaces for dialogue were created, where citizens could express their opinions. The first lights of a more open society began to shine, although a long road remained. However, the question that persists in historical memory is whether these reforms were truly effective or merely symbolic. It is debated whether the Enlightenment in Venice was a true catalyst for change or a manifestation of what could have been. History tends to be fertile ground for mysteries, and the legacy of this period remains a subject of debate. As the repercussions of the Enlightenment resonated, the city prepared to face a new reality. The tension between tradition and modernity intensified, and the fate of the Republic hung by a thread. Change was imminent. In this context, the Napoleonic invasion of 1797 loomed as a threat, an event that would seal the fate of the Republic. The next stage delves into the fall of the Republic of Venice, an occurrence that would not only mark the end of an era, but also raise profound questions. It is pertinent to analyze what new challenges and mysteries awaited. The Enlightenment would soon transform into a cataclysm. By the end of the 18th century, Venice found itself in a delicate balance, caught between the legacy of its glorious past and the complexities of an uncertain future. The Most Serene Republic, which had navigated the seas of history with cunning, began to feel the pressure of the political currents stirring in Europe. The French Revolution had erupted in 1789, sowing the seeds of revolution. But it was the repercussions of the Napoleonic invasion that would seal the fate of this venerable republic. In the context of 18th century Europe, the world was in constant transformation. The Enlightenment had challenged traditional principles of authority, and the ideas of freedom and equality resonated. Venice, with its unique political structure, found itself at a crossroads. The Venetian elite, composed of nobles, had enjoyed centuries of independence, but the imminent threat of Napoleon Bonaparte began to unveil the fragility of their power. The Republic, which had resisted the most formidable powers, was confronted with an enemy not only militarily superior but also bearer of an ideology that promised radical change. The key figures in this historical drama are Napoleon himself, a young general who would rise rapidly, and the Council of Ten of Venice, the body that governed the Republic with a firm hand. In 1796, after a series of victories in Italy, the Napoleonic forces advanced toward the heart of the Republic. The decision to resist or negotiate became a dilemma for the Venetian leaders. They debated whether they should risk everything in a war that could lead to ruin or accept capitulation and maintain some vestige of autonomy. The development of events accelerated in the following months. In March of 1797, the French troops, with unstoppable fervor, entered Venetian territory. The population, caught between fear and hope, watched as the banner of the Republic began to fade. The resistance was short-lived. The local forces, disorganized, could not withstand the military machine of Napoleon. On the 12th of May in 1797, the Republic of Venice, after more than 1,000 years of independence, officially dissolved. In a symbolic act that would resonate for generations, the Great Council was dissolved and the Doge was deposed. The immediate consequences of this invasion were devastating. Venice not only lost its independence, it also became immersed in radical transformations. Venetian culture faced a new reality under French rule. Traditional institutions were discarded and daily life was altered. The city, which had been a center of autonomy, became a manifestation of the imperial ambitions of a man who dreamed of a unified continent. But the question persists. What secrets and legacies did the fall of the Republic leave in the collective memory? Was Napoleon's invasion a mortal blow or an opportunity for rebirth? The complexities of history invite us to reflect on the fate of a city that, although caught in the tide, never ceased to be a symbol of resistance. As the repercussions of the fall of the Republic fade, we find ourselves at the threshold of a new era. In the next chapter, we will explore how Venice adapted and survived under Austrian rule, and how this stage, far from being an end, would become a key chapter in the path toward its resurgence. The fall of the Republic opened the door to a turbulent period in the history of Venice. With the dissolution in 1797, a new chapter would be written in its destiny, the incorporation into the Austrian Empire. This turn signified a profound transformation in the political, social, and economic fabric of this jewel of the Lagoon. The historical context surrounding the incorporation was one of agitation. Late 18th century Europe was immersed in a whirlwind of revolutions. The French Revolution had shaken the foundations of ancient monarchies and had sown liberal ideas. Venice, with its long tradition of autonomy, found itself in a state of vulnerability. The loss of its independence was not merely a military blow, but the culmination of a process that had begun much earlier, when European powers began to gaze greedily at its heritage. The key figures in this drama are numerous. At the center of the scene is Emperor Francis II of Austria, who, after Napoleon's defeat, endeavored to restore the old order. The figure of Napoleon, although absent, remains present as an influence on the decisions of his successors. In the local sphere, the Venetian elite, who had enjoyed centuries of privilege, faced the threat of a new administration. The crucial decisions of this era manifested in the Treaty of Campo Formio of 1797, which sealed the fate of Venice. This treaty, signed between France and Austria, not only handed the city over to the Austrians, but also altered the political map of the region. With this agreement, Venice became a symbol of Austrian power, a banner under which the legacy of the Republic was forced to yield. The development of the events that followed was a mix of uncertainty and adaptation. The Austrians, who assumed control, attempted to implement administrative reforms. However, the resistance of the Venetians was not long in coming. Initially, the population was skeptical. The influence of the Republic still loomed large, and many longed for freedom. Linguistic and cultural differences, combined with the perception of being governed by strangers, fueled a latent discontent. The reforms, although necessary, failed to quell the tensions. The Venetian economy, which had flourished, faced new challenges under Austrian control. The fiscal and commercial policies imposed by Vienna, designed to benefit the empire, often harmed local merchants. The Venetians found themselves caught between the need to adapt to a new reality and the yearning for a glorious past. The immediate consequences of this occupation were profound. The Venetians were forced to navigate a new political landscape marked by authoritarianism. Revolts and resistance movements began to emerge, marking the start of a struggle that would last for decades. Despite the reforms, the educational system and cultural life underwent transformations that did not satisfy the aspirations of its population. However, amid this confusion, the question of the chapter arises: could Venice ever regain its autonomy, and how would this affect its identity? The history of the city seemed intertwined with the forces of an expanding empire, while its inhabitants fought to preserve their essence. Thus, as the manifestations of Venetian resistance began to take shape, a new movement was brewing. Venice, although under Austrian control, would become a key player in a broader drama: the resurgence of Italian nationalism. In the upcoming chapters, we will explore how this story of resistance intertwines with the fervour of the desire for unification, leading Venice to become a symbol of national identity in the 19th century. Austrian control became a catalyst for the aspirations of a people yearning to reclaim their identity. By the end of the 19th century, the influence of Austrian domination was still present in Venice, a distant manifestation of the glorious republic it once was. The political atmosphere was saturated with tensions as nationalist ideas began to infiltrate the collective consciousness. It was a time of change, in which Italian unification loomed as an imminent reality, and Venice, with its rich history, would play a crucial role. The historical context surrounding the unification of Italy was marked by fragmentation. By the middle of the 19th century, the peninsula was composed of multiple states and kingdoms. The Kingdom of Sardinia, under the leadership of Victor Emmanuel II, emerged as a leader among the unifying forces, with the shrewd Count of Cavour as its political architect. In this environment of fervour, the repercussions of the French Revolution and independence movements resonated among those aspiring for freedom. In this context, key figures began to make decisions that would change history. One of them was Giuseppe Garibaldi, a national hero who, with his charisma, became a symbol of the struggle. His arrival on the scene was like the spark that ignited the flame of nationalism. Garibaldi, with his famous Army of the Thousand, set out to liberate and unify the Italian territories, a mission that would lead him to decisive confrontations. However, his success would not be achieved without the collaboration of other factions and leaders, such as the cunning Cavour, who maneuvered to achieve his objectives. In 1866, the climax arrived. The Third Italian War of Independence began as a confrontation between the Kingdom of Italy and the Austrian Empire. Venice, which had been under Austrian control since 1797, became a symbol of nationalist longing. The Venetians, inspired by the events, began to organize themselves, fueling the resistance. The old glories of the Republic resonated as they prepared to reclaim their place. The development of events accelerated when the Kingdom of Italy joined Prussia in its war against Austria. The battles fought defined the fate of the region. A series of confrontations, including the significant Battle of Custoza, marked the path. Although the Italian forces faced initial defeats, the momentum of popular movements and military pressure ultimately led to victory. In a dramatic turn, the Treaty of Prague, signed in August of 1866, sealed the fate of Venice, which would be annexed to the Kingdom of Italy. The immediate consequences were profound. The annexation not only marked the end of a period of oppression, but also symbolized the culmination of a dream. The city, which had been a bastion of culture, now found itself under the Italian flag. However, the transition was not straightforward. Many Venetians, although relieved from the Austrian yoke, faced the reality of being part of a new state, raising questions about their identity. It is pertinent to analyze how Venetian traditions would integrate and whether it would be possible for the rich heritage to be lost. The question of the chapter looms over us. It is debated whether unification was a triumph for Venice or a sacrifice of its uniqueness in the name of a broader identity. The victory over Austria brought the promise of a bright future, but at the cost of a rich history that risked being submerged in homogenization. As the streets of Venice vibrated, the city began to adapt to its role. The history of Venice, a narrative of resistance, would continue to unfold, facing new challenges. The transition into the 20th century would mark a period of transformation. It is pertinent to analyze whether Venice, with its unparalleled legacy, could find a balance between modernity and its heritage. The answer will await in the next chapter. The Nationalist Resurgence gave way to a radical transformation in the city of Canals. Venice, at the dawn of the 20th century, found itself at a crossroads where the influence of the past met unsettling modernity. Industrialization, a phenomenon that had swept through many European cities, began to manifest in the narrow streets of the Most Serene Republic, introducing a new rhythm of life that threatened to blur the essence of its legacy. The historical context of this transformation is fundamental. Following the Italian unification in 1861, Venice became a symbol of national identity, but it also found itself caught in the struggle between the old order and the new currents of capitalism. The arrival of the railway in 1865, which connected Venice with the rest of Italy, opened the door to a flow of tourists and the arrival of industries. However, this modernization came with challenges. How could a city built on instability withstand the pressures of industrialization? Among the relevant figures of this era was Senator Giovanni Giolitti, who, as Prime Minister of Italy, promoted policies that favored industrial development but, at the same time, ignored the specific needs of Venice. The arrival of factories and the expansion of infrastructure threatened to disrupt the delicate balance of its ecosystem. The decisions of Giolitti and other leaders were crucial in creating an environment that, while promising prosperity, also foreshadowed an uncertain future. As the century progressed, the development of tourism became the economic engine. The city, once a stronghold of trade, transformed into a dream destination. Although this new influx of visitors brought vitality, it also posed a dilemma. At what cost was this metamorphosis taking place? The streets, flooded with tourists, began to lose their authenticity, and the coexistence between Venetians and visitors became tense. During this period, Venetian architecture was also affected. Historic buildings began to be adapted to meet the needs of a booming tourism industry. The construction of hotels, often without consideration for aesthetics, became a common phenomenon. Machines and construction echoed through the canals while gondolas struggled to find their way. The events of the First World War delineated a new chapter. The city, which had been a symbol of peace, became embroiled in the conflict and suffered the consequences of a war that deeply affected its economy. The post-war period brought a radical change in the perception of tourism. If it had previously been appreciated as a luxury, it now became a necessity for recovery. The immediate consequences were palpable. In the decade of the 1920s, Venice began to attract artists and intellectuals. However, this attraction also led to an increasing commercialization of its heritage. The question that arose was whether the city was sacrificing its essence at the altar of progress. The issue of this modern era centers on the tension between preservation and transformation, the struggle between those who defended authenticity and those who saw tourism as a means of salvation intensified. It is pertinent to analyze whether Venice, with its rich history, could adapt without losing its soul. As the chapter of the modern era closes, history finds itself at a crossroads. The influence of war was fading, but new threats emerged, leading the city toward an unexpected conflict. The Second World War loomed, and with it, a new set of challenges that would test the resilience of the Most Serene Republic. It is pertinent to analyze how Venetians would confront this new storm that threatened to sweep away their legacy. The search for Venetian identity, marked by its rich history, would be overshadowed by the repercussions of war in the 20th century. The Second World War not only altered the course of global history but also profoundly transformed life in Venice, leaving an indelible mark on its social and urban fabric. In the years leading up to the conflict, Venice, with its architectural splendor and prominent role, found itself caught between the tensions of Europe. The influence of fascism loomed over Italy, with Benito Mussolini leading a regime that sought to restore imperial greatness through aggression. Mussolini's Italy aligned itself with the Axis powers, a decision that would lead Venice to experience a series of events that would shape its destiny. The early years of the war would not be kind. The invasion of Poland in 1939 and Italy's subsequent entry into the conflict in 1940 brought Venice to a state of alert. The city, with its extensive network of canals, became a strategic target. In 1941, bombings began to resonate and daily life transformed into a struggle for survival. The population was forced to adapt to a new environment of fear, where air raid sirens became part of the soundscape. Key figures of this era, such as the military governor, General Enrico Frattini, and the city's podesta, Aldo B. Rinaldi, were responsible for making critical decisions in a context of uncertainty. With the pressure of the fascist regime and the threat of Allied forces, severe measures were implemented to control the population. Propaganda became a fundamental tool, fueling the ideology of the regime. As the war progressed, Allied forces began to carry out strategic bombings on infrastructure, seeking to dismantle the military capabilities of the Axis. On the 17th of March in 1945, a devastating air raid left scars on the city. St. Mark's Square, the heart of Venice, became the scene of destruction that few could have imagined. Historic buildings were threatened by flames and the explosion of military ordnance. The immediate consequences were devastating. The civilian population suffered the loss of homes and loved ones. The local economy, already in decline, sank even further. However, amid this adversity, Venetian resilience emerged as a beacon of hope. As Allied forces advanced, Venetians began to organize into resistance movements, challenging fascist control. The liberation of Venice in May of 1945 brought a mix of relief and chaos. Despite the victory, the city faced a new question: reconstruction. The debate centered on how Venice, with its rich history, could rise from the ashes. The answer would not be simple. The infrastructure had suffered severe damage, and the lack of resources complicated recovery. The lingering question was whether the Most Serene Republic could shine once more with the same splendor. The post-war period became a time of transformation. Reconstruction involved not only restoring buildings but also revitalizing identity. The involvement of architects and artists, along with support from international institutions, allowed Venice to find a new purpose. The city began to attract tourists once again. However, the influence of war did not dissipate. The memory of those dark days remained alive. The scars of war became part of the legacy, reminding everyone of the fragility of peace. The debate continued on whether Venice's history, marked by tragedy, could become a symbol of rebirth. As the city ventured into modernity, the influence of war and its recovery would continue to resonate. The story of the Second World War and its impact is not only a dark chapter, but also a testament to a city's capacity to adapt. Thus, when contemplating the future of Venice, it is impossible not to wonder what mysteries still lie in its canals, waiting to be discovered. The transition towards modernization and the preservation of heritage would become the next great challenge. The arrival of mass tourism would bring new questions about the balance between legacy and contemporary needs. It is pertinent to analyze how a city so rich in history can navigate the waters of modernity. World War II would soon transform into an even more complex dilemma: the struggle between the preservation of Venice's cultural heritage and the pressure of mass tourism. In recent decades, the city has witnessed exponential growth in the number of visitors, a phenomenon that, while bringing economic benefits, also presents complexities regarding its legacy. The beauty of its canals and the majesty of its architecture have become a magnet for millions, but at a cost that many consider intolerable. As the 21st century progresses, Venice faces a historical context marked by the challenge of tourism. The transformation of the city into a global destination has altered its social landscape. From the celebration of Carnival to the serenade in St. Mark's Square, Venetian traditions are now part of the spectacle that attracts crowds. It is pertinent to analyze at what price this spectacle is maintained. Tourist saturation has led to tangible wear on its infrastructure. The key figures in this story are, first and foremost, the local authorities, represented by the City Council of Venice and the regional government of Veneto, who have had to make difficult decisions. Their efforts to balance tourism development with conservation have been subject to criticism. On one hand, restrictions have been implemented on access to iconic sites. On the other, the lack of a long-term plan has led to a sense of improvisation. The figure of the mayor has become central, representing both the hope for a sustainable future and the frustration of the citizens. The decisions of local leaders, although well-intentioned, have sparked heated debates. In 2017, the City Council introduced an entry fee for tourists, a measure aimed at mitigating the influx. There is debate over whether the experience of Venice can truly be priced. Many wonder if this action is more than an attempt to control a phenomenon that has exceeded its capacity. Criticism has emerged from various fronts, from the local community to heritage scholars. Throughout this chapter, events unfold that reflect the tension between conservation and tourism. In 2019, the Grand Canal became the scene of protests, where Venetians expressed their despair at the arrival of large cruise ships that seemed to challenge the city's fragility. Images of these gigantic vessels became a symbol of the struggle between legacy and modernity. In this context, voices calling for the protection of heritage intensified, advocating for more responsible tourism. The immediate consequences are palpable. Tourist saturation has led to an increase in the cost of living for residents, who are forced to leave their homes. Furthermore, the deterioration of historic buildings, exacerbated by the constant flow of visitors, poses a dilemma with no apparent solution. The marble facades that once shone are now affected by erosion, a manifestation of the fragility of a vulnerable legacy. But the real question facing Venice is whether it is possible to find a balance between tourism and conservation. There is debate over whether the city can continue to be a center of culture and heritage without sacrificing its essence at the altar of mass tourism, and what legacy the decisions made today will leave. These questions linger like a mist over the canals and serve as a reminder of the struggle for Venetian identity. As we delve into the next chapter, it becomes evident that the story of Venice is not only marked by its past, but also by the threats looming over its future. The city faces not only the challenges of tourism, but is also threatened by broader forces. On the horizon loom the consequences of climate change and rising sea levels, raising the question of whether Venice will be able to survive its own success. Mass tourism has been overshadowed by an even more insidious and persistent challenge. In the canals of Venice, the city faces environmental threats that could affect its splendor. Since its founding, the city has lived in a delicate balance with water, but climate change and rising sea levels have begun to disturb that balance in alarming ways. In the context of the 21st century, the political landscape of Venice has been profoundly influenced by climate transformation. The scientific community has begun to sound the alarm, and the repercussions of their warnings resonate within the municipal administration. Recent research reveals that, in recent decades, sea levels have risen by approximately 20 centimeters. A phenomenon that not only threatens historical structures, but also endangers daily life. The combination of high tides, storms, and constant erosion has caused salt water to penetrate the low-lying areas, affecting infrastructure and heritage. The response of the Venetian authorities has been a web of complex decisions, often marked by controversy. In this context, the Italian engineer and architect Maurizio Cattelan was key in designing the MOSI system, an ambitious project aimed at protecting the city from flooding. However, the implementation of this work has been plagued by delays and scandals, leading many to question whether time is running out. There is debate over whether a city as historic as Venice can truly find effective solutions to such a significant threat. As environmental problems intensify, the impact on the lives of Venetians has become undeniable. Annual floods, once exceptional events, have turned into a common phenomenon. In 2019, Venice experienced one of the worst floods in decades, with water levels reaching 187 centimeters. Submerging historic squares such as the iconic St. Mark's Square. Merchants and residents have seen their businesses and homes threatened. It is pertinent to analyze what future awaits those who have lived in this city for generations. However, the history of Venice is not limited to its struggle against water. The city is a symbol of resilience. Local communities have begun to take proactive measures to mitigate the effects of climate change, from restoring ecosystems to promoting sustainable practices. Groups of citizens have come together, renewing their commitment to protecting the environment. This community renaissance raises a question. Can the unity of Venetians be the key to saving their city from its fate? As we delve into the question of Venice's future, it is evident that the legacy of the city and its capacity for adaptation are matters of vital importance. The history of Venice is marked by its unbreakable spirit, but the challenge it faces is monumental. It is pertinent to analyze whether Venetians will be able to preserve their city or if they will succumb to the forces of nature. In this context, the future of Venice becomes not only a matter of local interest, but also a microcosm of the global struggle against climate change. The next stage of our exploration will take us to examine current initiatives that seek to ensure the sustainability of this historic city. The question persists: is it possible for Venice, a floating legacy, to navigate towards a safer and more resilient future? In the manifestations of the waters that cradle the stones of Venice, one question persists. How can a city, standing on piles and dreams, face the challenges of an uncertain future while its past glories still resonate? The decline of the Most Serene Republic, foreign rule and industrialization have left scars, but they have also forged a legacy that cries out to endure. In this final chapter, we will delve into contemporary initiatives that seek to ensure the sustainability of Venice, revealing the efforts of those who strive to preserve its essence. The current historical context of Venice is an amalgamation of centuries-old traditions and contemporary pressures. After decades of mass tourism and the impact of climate change, Venetians face an existential dilemma. The repercussions of history intertwine with present reality, where the descendants of those who built the city must find ways to adapt. Thus, in this scenario, voices of local leaders, scientists, and innovators emerge, having made crucial decisions. Among these actors, the figure of Mayor Luigi Brugnaro stands out. Since taking office in 2015, Brugnaro has promoted initiatives aimed at balancing tourism and the lives of residents. His approach, often controversial, has been to advocate for more sustainable tourism by limiting access to large cruise ships. In 2021, the ban on these maritime giants in the lagoon was met with applause and criticism, reflecting the complexity of the debate surrounding Venetian identity. Simultaneously, the scientific community has begun to play a fundamental role. Researchers from the Institute of Marine Sciences have been working on a project known as MOSE, Experimental Electromechanical Module, a system of mobile barriers designed to protect the city from flooding. However, time is an unrelenting enemy. It is debated whether this ambitious engineering will succeed in mitigating rising sea levels and preserving the fragile balance. The decisions of the authorities regarding the implementation of MOSE are crucial. But so is the willingness of Venetians to adapt. The development of events surrounding sustainability has been a slow process, marked by the resistance of those who cling to traditions. In 2022, a group of citizens came together to form Venezia 2030, a coalition that seeks to engage the community in decision-making. This movement has demonstrated that the voice of the people can resonate powerfully. But the question remains whether it will be enough to counteract the power of tourism corporations. The immediate consequences of these initiatives are palpable. Life in the city has begun to change. The flow of tourists has decreased, and many Venetians have reclaimed public space. However, this transformation is not without tensions. The decisions made regarding sustainable tourism have sparked a profound debate about Venetian identity. What does it mean to be a Venetian in a city that often seems more like a museum than a home? The influence of the past projects onto the present, and the answers remain elusive. In this question of the future of Venice, questions arise that invite reflection. It is pertinent to analyze what secrets lie hidden in the decisions of those who seek to preserve the city, and whether the struggle for sustainability reveals a deeper quest to rediscover the Venetian essence. As the waters continue to rise, a new challenge presents itself, finding a balance between cultural legacy and adaptation. The gaze towards the future of this iconic city is a journey that involves collaboration between citizens and governments. The recovery of public spaces and the promotion of a circular economy are just some of the steps towards a more sustainable Venice. It is debated whether this will be sufficient in the face of the magnitude of the forces that threaten its existence. The struggle for identity and sustainability reflects the broader battle between the past and the future. Thus, as we bid farewell to the Venetian narrative, the impression remains that the legacy of this city is not limited to its history, but resides in the capacity of its inhabitants to reinvent themselves. Venice, with its beauty and fragility, continues to be a symbol of resilience. The decisions made today will define not only its tomorrow, but also the repercussions that will resonate in future generations. The story of Venice is not over. It is a tale in constant evolution. In this journey, we have discovered that the future of Venice is a complex issue, an analysis that continues to unfold in the waters of the lagoon. It is pertinent to consider what revelations the future holds for us, and whether this city, which has survived so many adversities, will find a way to thrive once more. The answer remains in the air. A reminder that the legacy of Venice is both a treasure to be protected and a challenge to be faced.